Hello 301 students. I want to take a minute and go through the example essay that you were given for your researched argument. So this sample academic paper. I want to talk about what this paper does well and then maybe where it could be stronger and some things that you could do that it doesn't do that will help your essay be stronger in the end. Okay, so the first thing that this essay does well is that it follows APA formatting for the setup of the essay. You've got a great title page here with a running head and a clear abstract page. So as you're drafting your own essay, you want to follow what Emily does here in her essay, how she writes her abstract. Remember, you talk about yourself in the third person, the keywords, and the setup for the APA format, including the running head here at the top. So just make sure you're following that APA because she does that well. Then we get to the introduction. So when you look at the introduction, introductions usually start with a story or a situation or a study, something that hooks the audience and gets our attention and transitions well into the topic. And I think she does that well with this story of Zach and his hearing dog. She uses correct APA formatting and citation here because this is probably from a website and not an article, so she has the title of the website and the date here. What I don't like about this introduction is this paragraph that's sort of hanging in the middle. An introduction to an essay this size should be about 1.5 pages, and most likely about 2 solid paragraphs. Your hook and then your discussion, and even if you use a source, you're transitioning to the research question and your thesis. So I didn't like that this paragraph, either it needed connected here, it seemed a little bit odd and out of place. As we get towards the end of the introduction, we get our thesis about how animals talk and use signals to communicate their own needs. What I wish this thesis would have done, and I think would have been stronger, first of all, what's the research question? It's acceptable to include your research question right before your thesis because your thesis is going to be the answer to the research question. And then I don't really get a sense of the argument here. What is the opposing view, and do people not believe that animals communicate, right? Is there some controversy associated with that? We're not really understanding what the argument is. So you really want to make sure in your introduction that you include the research question and that you make it clear, that you're arguing something that has an argument to it. And that will really help develop that introduction. So good start here. To me, this introduction is in the B range. To get to the A range, it needed some of those other things. It moves into the lines of argument, and these are your points or your ideas that support your argument, and it starts with a couple paragraphs of background. 1.5 pages of background or a page is acceptable, and that's what Emily does here, where she kind of talks about the history of the study of dog language, particularly focusing on this research of Stanley Coren. One thing she needs to do correctly is the citations. You can't just put page numbers, you need to put the full citation because you have multiple sources. So although through inference, it's clear that this comes from Stanley Cohen, right? Because that's what she's discussing. We really, Coren, sorry about that, I keep saying his last name wrong. We really need the clear and full citation. And she does that better later on. It's just right here, she switches to the page numbers and that's not correct. Then we move into more background and starting to get into the argument. So, the way that they process language and that they're human. And then there's a correct sort of citation. See how that one's done correctly. So background, but then we move into the argument. And the way you want to structure your points is that the start of a paragraph should outline one of your lines of argument. What is one of your points that support your thesis that answers your research question? All of those should be connected. So this one right here, argues that animals do more than recognize and respond. So she's kind of using what has already been found with canines to process and go further. That's her argument. It's kind of a weak argument overall, but I think that she's formatted this correctly. So she has a point supported by 1 or 2 references in research. Make sure not to oversource your argument. It should be mostly your voice. I like to use a 1/3, 2/3 rule. As I look at a paragraph, is it 2/3 my voice and 1/3 sources? If it's the opposite, then you're using too much source information. So 1 or 2 references or quotes per point is what you want to stick to. There's another point here, right? Another discussion. She's using these good headings to indicate her points and her arguments, so she thought she did that well. Then she gets into her opposing views, and opposing views are what people might argue against you, right? And she sets that up really nicely, and then kind of uses the discussion of critics. Critics might say this, some critics might say this. She even has sources to support the critics and what they say. I feel like this paragraph is a little over-sourced. We need more. But what she does well is she sets up the opposing views argument and then she responds to it with some good argumentative language. Does that again here, sets up sort of the argument of a critic and responds to it here at the end. A great conclusion that really emphasizes what she was trying to argue, and a correctly done reference page. So I like this essay. To me, due to its some of the weaker parts of its argument, it's kind of in the A-B+ range, more leaning towards the B+. I think I would have liked a stronger thesis, a little bit more lines of argument and less background. Seemed to be a lot of background. And then, of course, a little bit heavy on the sources. I wanted more of her voice. So that's how I would score this one. This is the one that the course has provided. And so I just wanted you to see kind of how I felt about it and what you can do to make sure yours is as strong or stronger. Let me know if you have any questions.